So at this point, you should have completed your praise paragraph, and part of that is an explanation of how the writer develops or supports their thesis. Theoretically, this explanation of how the writer develops their thesis is going to go along with how you organize your essay. So in the case of the Abigail Adams prompt, you may have mentioned that one way she develops her thesis is by defending her choice to send him overseas. So that might be something that would be one of the first ways that she develops her point here. So we're going to work with that as a sample topic sentence because that deals with the first chunk of that text. So I've mentioned chunking text before, and I'm just going to go back to that really quickly just to review, because this becomes really important when we start to actually get down to the writing of these essays. When we write argument and synthesis essays, we know that we are organizing according to the points that we're making. So our first body paragraph in an argument essay is going to be based on our first reason. Well, these are not set up exactly the same way, but they do kind of mirror that structure. So instead of basing our organization on our own reasoning, we need to kind of base this on the organizational structure of the prompt itself. So because we marked those three chunks, that's what we would divide this into. So my first chunk is these first two paragraphs. So my first topic sentence is going to be based on those first two paragraphs. So when I go back in here and I look at that, my topic sentence might say something like, Adams opens her letter to her son by defending her choice to send him overseas and reassuring him that she only has his best interests at heart. So the reason why I want to open with a topic sentence like that is because that encompasses all of the specific examples that I would want to talk about in that first two paragraph chunk. So once I've decided what ties all of that together, what that chunk of text has in common, then I want to start planning the paragraph, and I want to plan on what I'm going to write that analyzes. And I want to make sure I get beyond summary. So in order to do that, I'm going to use a technique called says, does, because. With says, does, because, it has three pretty clear and obvious parts. The first part is what the text says. So this is where you'll be using quotes or paraphrases. What does the author say? The second piece, and this is where you're beginning to do some analysis. This discusses what the author does. So here we want to use a rhetorically accurate verb to describe what the speaker is doing with those words. And you have a chart or you have a handout that lists some rhetorically accurate verbs. Things that you can say instead of says, states, writes, and also instead of uses, which is not the best. Although I think it is on this chart. So just ignore that. Don't say uses if you can help it. Use one of these other more descriptive verbs. And it also at the bottom has a list of words to not use in your rhetorical analysis or any other writing. Particular pet peeve stuff. Okay. Anyway, so back to says, does, because. So you want to describe what the speaker is doing, and you want to be able to explain why they're doing what they're doing. Explain how Abigail Adams hopes to impact her audience with her actions. So what I'm going to ask you to do now is fill out a chart where you explore those kind of says, does, because pattern. So I've amended my thesis or my topic sentence a little bit here because I want to use some of that language that I had originally used in my topic sentence as part of my because analysis. So I did amend this a little bit. So now my topic sentence is, Adams opens her letter to her son by defending her choice to send him overseas. So I've divided this into 3 sections. So my first section is lines 1 through 15, and I've labeled that here. What she says in this section is, If she had thought he didn't want to go because he had thought it out clearly, she should not have urged him to accompany his father. What she's doing when she says that is reiterating why she wanted her son to go on this trip, even when he didn't want to go in the first place. Why she's doing that is because she wants to reassure him of her good intentions and motherly concern. Another example from the text of what she says is you 14 times. She repeats the second person pronoun you and your 14 times. So, the verbs I'm using here are reiterates and repeats. Okay. And then why is she repeating? Well, she's repeating that pronoun so many times because she wants him to know that he is her central focus. So those three elements should be a part of every body paragraph that you write. The does is where you get to the beginning of rhetorical analysis, and the because piece is where you really address their purpose and their intended effect on the audience. So that's where you get into the analysis that really needs to be done. If you'll use each of these three pieces in each body paragraph, then you can be writing adequate and effective rhetorical analysis essays. What I'd like for you to do is take a moment and fill out your says, does, because chart. You have this in Google Classroom, theoretically. Yeah, so this is what yours looks like. I just copied and pasted the top half and put that in the slide presentation. So what I'm asking you to do is fill in those same elements for section 2 and section 3, the way that we divided that up. So 16 through 49 is the second section, and 50 through 64 is the third section. What I'd like for you to do is choose 3 specific pieces of text and tell me what they say. Then tell me what the author's doing with that language and why she wants to do those things with that language. And then I want you to repeat the same thing for section 3. Once you do that, we are going to talk about how that translates into the actual writing of a rhetorical analysis essay. Okay, at this point, you should be done with your graphic organizer, your chart, and we can start talking about how that translates into writing body paragraphs. We've already covered what a topic sentence for this first set of 2 paragraphs might look like. We've got Adams opens her letter to her son by defending her choice to send him overseas. So just like any body paragraph, we start with a topic sentence, and then we lead into an example. And that does sound a lot like what we do in argument or synthesis writing. We lead into an example, we give the example, and then we give commentary on the example. The difference is how that commentary looks with rhetorical analysis. Instead of explaining how the example supports our reason, we explain how the example relates to the author's purpose. And we want to use those power verbs that we have on the handout and that hopefully you wrote down on your graphic organizer. Then you want to transition to the next example and do those things again, except for the topic sentence, and then hopefully end by transitioning into a new paragraph. When we use quotes in rhetorical analysis, we want to make sure that we don't just have them floating out there by themselves. And we also want to make sure that we don't use quotes that are too long and that take us out of the mood that the student writer is creating. We want the quotes to flow with our own language. So we could just drop a quote in. If I had thought your reluctance arose from proper deliberation, or that you were capable of judging what was most for your own benefit, I should not have urged you to accompany your father. That's a little bit of a lengthy quote. With the I's in there, it doesn't really sound like it's going to flow with our own language. So we've got to do a little bit of paraphrasing, and then we've also got to do a little bit of setup. So what's in this example is not just what the author says, but also a little bit of what she does and why she does it. So we can do our says, does, because all in one sentence. In this example, my lead-in really uses some of the does and because before we get to what she says. And that's okay. We can invert that order. In this example, it says, in order to convince her son of her positive intentions and motherly concern, Adams reiterates her reasons for wanting him to go, reassuring him that if she had thought he was fully thinking through his opportunity to travel to France, she should not have urged him to accompany his father. So this statement that begins in order to convince her son of her positive intentions and motherly concern, that's why she's saying these things. So I've got my because statement in the beginning. Adams reiterates her reasons for wanting him to go. Reiterates, that's what she's doing. She's also reassuring him, so I've got another does statement here. And then the paraphrase is, if she had thought he was fully thinking through his opportunity to travel to France. And then the second half I've quoted, she should not have urged him to accompany his father. So we've got says, does, because, and we've got two types of says. We've got a paraphrase to start it out and then the quote at the end. So all of those elements of analysis are present in this one sentence. So how does that look as part of a whole paragraph? Oh, wait, before we get there, the structure of that is introduce, cite, explain. So we need to make sure, in addition to having says, does, because in every paragraph, every time we use a quote, we want to introduce it, cite it, and explain it. So now how that looks in a paragraph, the introduction is this beginning part in blue. The citation is the actual paraphrase and quote itself. And then we want to explain a little bit. And we have some explanation really in the beginning of this. So you can also invert that order as well, but or combine the explanation with the introduction. But we can also expand on that. So my little green piece here, while this statement casts doubt upon her son's judgment, Adams does go on in the next paragraph to compliment him on his ultimate decision to follow her advice. So my explanation that is continued is, while this statement casts doubt upon her son's judgment, because she's telling him that she doesn't think she fully thought it through. So that's the doubt. And I'm also using that to transition to what I think she's doing in the next paragraph. So she does go on in the next paragraph to compliment him on his ultimate decision to follow her advice. And I am going to finish out this paragraph based on what's in my my next box of my chart. And I've also added in, you can see I've added in my topic sentence. I've got what I had before. I've got my transition. So what I had in my chart was the you times 14. The does, she repeats the second person pronouns you and your 14 times. And the because is she wants him to know that he is her central focus. And of course, I've already talked about that being a compliment. So how I might pull all that together concisely is what I want to think about. In order to pull this together concisely, I do want to look back at what I've said in this earlier slide. So I've got, she says you 14 times. She repeats the second person pronouns, you and your. She wants him to know that he is her central focus. So back to my paragraph here. I might say something like, through the repetition of the second person pronouns, you and your, she signals to him that her focus is on him and his personal growth. And then I might also find a way to transition into the next paragraph. So my next focus is probably going to be about what that growth is. So I could make a statement about that, or because I've already mentioned personal growth here, that could serve as enough of a connection to where I can just go right into my next topic sentence.